Welcome to the North Tonawanda Football Hall of Fame YouTube channel. I'm Ed Helinski. Have another terrific guest here today for us. I'm going taking a trip down to Kenmore West specifically. This gentleman came out of the program at Kenmore West in the early 1960s. Went on to be a walk-on at the University of Buffalo, then coached at the University of Buffalo, and then carved out a wonderful college and a professional coaching career. He's arguably one of the best NFL assistant coaches, offensive line coaches in history. He should be in the Hall of Fame, but that's for another discussion. It's great to have with me today the one and the only Jim McNally. Hi, Coach. How are you?
Hey, Ed. Thanks for having me. And I love my homeboys. I have a big party every year. We call it the Mouse Pack Reunion, and 3/4 of them are from Kenmore East, Kenmore West. I used to have all the Sheasley boys until most of them have passed away. And so, yes, I'm here. I actually went to Kenmore High School before the school switched. So I'm really a Kenmore High School student. And then my junior year, the school split, and I spent my last 2 years at Kenmore West. So, and Tonawanda and NT were big rivals.
How did you get involved with sports and particularly football growing up?
Well, my dad, who is originally from Springville and had 9 or 10 brothers and sisters, and I think he spent a lot of his time at Father Baker's because they couldn't feed him at home in Springville. And bottom line is he was a star at Griffith Institute was the name of the school. I think it's the same one, Springville High School. And he got a scholarship in 1924 to Canisius. And if you go into the lobby of the Kessler Center at Canisius, you'll see my dad. He graduated in Canisius in 1928. He played all 3 sports. He was like the tailback in a single wing. He was probably 6'2", 230 pounds. And he's one of the local greats ever. But back in the day where no one would remember, he'd be 120 years old now. But so he was a sports fan. And, he got me into football when I was a kid and baseball. We really didn't have Little League football. We did have Little League baseball, but so most of my football was sandlot football. And he came to all my games, very encouraging. And, he was a big, tough guy. And I think that's where it started.
You were not 6'2" and 230 pounds. 5'8", maybe 5'9". You've been described on a good day. How big were you when you played high school football at Kenmore?
Well, if you stretch me at 5'9", I think my senior year I was 195. The most I ever weighed at UB was probably 215 pounds. So yes, if I got on my tippy toes that wasn't a legal way to get measured, but 5'9", 215 pound at the most. And my senior year, I think I was 195.
What were the playing conditions like at Kenmore, and what was the equipment like back then in high school football?
Well, the equipment was good as I remember. Our helmets were kind of those leather helmets. I mean, like Tonawanda wore, North Tonawanda, like the old Notre Dame helmets, like it would have a big stripe down the middle. And ours was painted white with the blue helmets, but we did have face masks. I think ours were a single face guard, but we had shoulder pads, we had hip pads, but they were big. They weren't like they do now where they just stick a knee pad in for your hips. But we had thigh pads, we had shoes. We had to buy our own low cut shoes if you wanted them. But the team supplied the high shoes. And I played for Coach Jakupovich, who later, not when I was playing for him, but later, 6, 7, 8 years later, became had some great teams. But like I said, we had good equipment, and we had good crowds. The sports were very. The students were backed. All the sports at Kenmore. We had outstanding basketball, football. I guess baseball was pretty good. So yeah, we had a good student support, and it was big sports at Kenmore High School when I went there.
Did you play any other sports besides football at Kenmore?
Yes, I did. I played JV basketball, and I think I smoked 2 cigarettes in my life, and I got cut off the JV basketball team. Somebody turned me in because there was all kinds of training rules, and someone turned me in. The captain, maybe. I was only on the JV team as a sophomore, so I got cut off the basketball team. So I didn't play basketball anymore, but I did play baseball. I was a catcher, and the best I could get was to be second string. I was a decent player, but we had a couple of great ones ahead of me, a guy named Marvin Miller, a guy named Dick Kiefer. And then my senior year, I did not play baseball. So I played baseball my sophomore and junior year, and I played football all 4 of my years. And so, yes, I did play a little JV basketball and 2 years of baseball.
What was it like playing for Coach Yakupovich?
Well, it was, when I was with him, our records were 4-4. Maybe we were 5-3 at the most. But so we weren't on those great teams that were a little later that were 7-1, 8-0, etc. But he demanded your respect. He was caring. He was knowledgeable. You loved the guy. You wanted to play for him, basically. At least the years I was there. So yeah, he was a mentor because he was not only a good football coach, he was a good teacher. He spoke a number of different languages. He taught German. He taught history. He was in World War II, and he went to Colgate and played football himself. And so he had a good background that if you were to check on his history, that you would be impressed with what he'd done before he became the coach at Kenmore.
Was he a well-prepared coach and a disciplinarian?
Yes, he was well-prepared. He was a disciplinarian. I don't remember him being, ranting and raving, but you had his respect, and he was stern. But I was the captain my senior year, and I remember almost every day in the summer, he lived over off of Sheridan Drive over in the Kenmore East area. And I had a car at that time. I drove. And I can remember it was almost every night in the summer I was over to his house, and we were talking football and how to lead the team and this, that, and the other. And yeah, he was really into the X's and O's and the techniques, and it was his passion. I'll say that.
What was it like playing in the Niagara Frontier League at that point? Describe the competition and the brand of football at that point.
Well, because I've coached in the NFL almost 50 years and college football all over the country for 15 years, and what I'm saying is have scouted colleges all over the country. I've been to the biggest ones, Ohio State, Notre Dame, been to the small ones. So all these other states that I've gone to, the high school football, these teams would play 10, 12 games. So where we were shortchanged for whatever reason, whether it was a New York State rule or whatever, we only played 8 games. But we didn't know any different. but the season was over almost mid-October. And when the season was over, you were sad. Like, the college teams were still playing. And so it was a short season. 8 games is not very many. And I still think they only play 8. But our big rivalries, I can say it was about 50-50, was Tonawanda and North Tonawanda. And then when the schools split, then Kenmore East became our natural rivalry. But down deep, the Tonawanda schools were really our rivals. And it was a big deal to go to both of those places, because both of those schools had great night games. The lights, under the lights. We didn't have lights at Kenmore. And when you played at North Tonawanda or Tonawanda under the lights, there was a glitter. There was Friday Night Lights, in recent football TV series and stuff like that. So it was exciting.
Did it make any difference that you played smaller schools or bigger schools? Lackawanna, Niagara Falls, Lockport, Trot?
No,
LaSalle?
not really, because occasionally one of those teams might beat us. We always have trouble with Niagara Falls. They had a great player named Jerry Tubinis my junior year. My senior year, they had a good quarterback, Dan Bazzini, who played basketball at UB. But we couldn't beat Niagara Falls when I was there. But we always seemed to be able to beat Lackawanna, Lockport, LaSalle, but Tonawanda, North Tonawanda, until Kenmore East came in. Now, Kenmore East wasn't that very good early because, we split schools. So it was Tonawanda, North Tonawanda, Kenmore, or Kenmore West, that were the top 3, I believe you could say, in the NFL. And the thing about it was, my dad belonged to the Eldridge Club, and that was a sports club in Tonawanda that's still there. And if it wasn't for Lynn Sheasley, putting it back together, so when I was a kid, my dad used to go to the Eldridge Club. I went to the Eldridge Club all the time, and I would see all these kids from Tonawanda and North Tonawanda that we'd play against. So you actually knew those kids from those Tonawanda schools, and you would meet them occasionally because, all 3 of those towns were so close together.
When you graduated from Kenmore West, did you have any other offers to play college football? I know you went to
I had a lot of offers, believe it or not. You wouldn't believe it, even though I was short. But my grades weren't good. When I say offers, it wasn't Notre Dame, Ohio State, whatever, but Delaware was after me. Miami of Ohio was after me. Actually, West Point. Of course, I didn't have grades, but they all wanted to send me to prep school. And I didn't want to do that. My dad was a traveling salesman, and it was just my grandmother, my mother, and my dad. And my father wanted me to stay home. And UB offered me a walk-on, and it was, I had to go to summer school to get my grades up, but they got me in. Another school that got me in was a small school named Allegheny College in Meadville, PA. I don't know how they got me in, but a guy down the street who went there took me there, and I got close with a coach named John Chuckrin, and they got me in school. But when UB offered me a walk-on candidate, as long as I made my grades, they played the better football, other than some of the other teams that wanted me to go to a prep school. And so that's when I went to UB. But I would say Miami of Ohio, University of Delaware were the 2 schools. Actually, the U.S. Army wanted me to go to the U.S. Army prep school. I don't know how the hell I would have got my grades to be good enough to go in there, but most of them wanted me to go to a postgraduate school.
When you went to University of Buffalo, how big of a culture shock was that for you?
Uh, well, it was a little bit of a culture shock. I mean, you know, it wasn't Penn State or Notre Dame, but it was a good brand of football. And the problem was when I was a freshman, you played both ways at that time, but they made me a linebacker, and I couldn't see very well over all these big linemen, so I hardly played as a freshman. But then when I was the spring of my freshman year, a guy named Joe Shiflett, who's a great local coach, was a graduate assistant, and he told Buddy Ryan, he says, you ought to put that McNally down in a stance like a defensive lineman. And they did that. And then my sophomore year, I earned a letter. And I didn't play a whole lot, but I earned enough to get a letter. And then we put in the wide tackle 6. And we, as it turned out, playing for Buddy Ryan, who made you a football player, I ended up starting for 2 years and earning a scholarship. So at first, I was out of position. And I was a little bit unhappy, wasn't playing. But then when Buddy Ryan got a hold of me and kicked me in the ass a little bit, he made me a football player, or at least as good as I could be.
Your undergraduate degree was business management, if I'm correct, if I'm not mistaken. Correct. And yes. your dad worked as a sales manager for Dunlop, and he wanted you to go that same route in the family business. You thought about going into education and maybe becoming a physical education teacher, and your father made the comment that you're just going to be rolling balls out on the floor. And
I said, I think I want to be a coach or a phys ed teacher. And he says, no, you need to go get into business and management and so forth and so on, because all they do is roll the balls out. So I mean, if it was up to me, I would have been a phys ed major, but I took business. I hated every minute of it. I think I flunked corporation finance and statistics, but I made it through. And then it took me 5 years to graduate. So after I graduated, Coach Offenhammer and Buddy Ryan, they wanted me to stay on as a student coach. So my 5th year, where I hadn't graduated yet, it was my first year being like a graduate assistant, even though I was still a student. So I had an extra year, starting coaching. And so that's pretty much how I started coaching. Coach Ryan says, I want you to come out and help the D line, the position that I played, although we played both ways. And I said, great. And they gave me a scholarship for being a student coach. And that's pretty much how I got into coaching. I was 10 years at UB as a player, coach, student, etc.
When the program was canceled at UB, what was the feeling that was going through you at that point? Is it time to go on the road and become an assistant elsewhere? Or
no, we were actually getting on the airplane. The coaching staff and the athletic director was right behind us. I think his name was Harry Fritz. And he walked up and he told us that we just dropped football. And that was in 1970. And, it was the season of 70, but it might have been January of 71. And we were going to the National Coaches Convention in Houston. And we were all in shock. I don't think there was a coach that didn't want to continue coaching. So we went on that search to find another job. And no, I did not consider going into another field.
Your next job was at Marshall, and that was a few months after the tragedy at Marshall where the football team was killed in that horrific airplane crash. What was it like coming in on that new staff in that type of situation and that type of environment?
Well, first of all, living in Kenmore, what was a great small community at that time. And I'd gone probably as far as North Tonawanda to the north. Into the south, I don't think I ever crossed Kenmore Avenue. If you know where Kenmore Avenue begins, Buffalo. And all of a sudden, I was married and my wife was pregnant. And, I had a few job interviews, Bowling Green, Bucknell, Rhode Island, I think. And then a friend of mine named Mike Stock, who had coached with the new head coach at Marshall, recommended me to Marshall. And then all of a sudden I go from little old Kenmore, New York. Of course, I went to UB. So I did have some exposure of, going on some trips and airplane trips and away games and so forth. But I was pretty much a hometown kid. And all of a sudden I'm in Huntington, West Virginia, where they, not necessarily Huntington, but, you heard the stories about those West Virginia hillbillies, their eyes are crossed and they marry their daughters and stuff like that. So it was a shock. I mean, I'm glad I got a job. The job they gave me at UB, they didn't fire any of the coaches. They kept us in some sort of a role. My role was to open up the gym in the morning, and I taught a senior class of aerobics. And that was my job. And so I knew they're not going to keep paying us forever. So again, I was lucky enough that I had a friend that had coached with me at UB and had moved on that recommended me to the new coach at Marshall. I went down there, interview, got the job.
What was that experience like? You spent a few years down there.
4 years. I had a great experience, believe it or not, in our community. We lived up on a hill, and everybody in the community, many of them were local, many of them were out of town, but it was, they all were Marshall supporters, because that was a big part of Huntington, West Virginia, was Marshall University. So we had a lot of social functions, parties, this, that, and the other. So I had a nice social life, my wife and I had 2 daughters, and I had met some of the wives of the coaches that were killed. I met many of the parents of the players that were killed. It was very eerie. It was sad. It was a real success when we'd win a game or two. And when we won the second game of our first year, we beat Xavier on the last play of the game. And that's what the play they show on the movie, We Are Marshall. And that was very exciting. I mean, of the 75 that were killed, there were probably 50 some football players, and the rest were local community doctors, business executives. So it not only affected the team, it affected the whole community. I mean, the head cheerleader's mom and dad was on the plane. So it was eerie. They wanted to play football. They were not going to take a year off. And they allowed us to play not only the freshmen who did not make the trip, because at that time freshmen couldn't play varsity football, but they allowed the new freshmen to be eligible.
I got to tell you something. My co-collaborator for this YouTube channel, a gentleman named Keith Pascucci, you tried to recruit him to Marshall. You sent him a letter when you were at Marshall. He graduated from North Tonawanda. He was a lineman. He didn't go, but to this day, he still has the letter and still very impressed by your letter that you thought enough of him to send him a letter to try to recruit him.
Well, where did you go to school?
I'm not quite sure. I don't think he continued his football career at that point. But how much recruiting did you do of Western New York players when you were at Marshall?
I did a lot of them. In fact, when I went to Marshall, I took 4 UB football players with me that were immediately eligible. I took a defensive back named Gene Nance, who was Jim Nance, the great big fullback who played for the Patriots. It was his brother. His name was Gene, and he was a very fast defensive back. I took a middle linebacker named David Homa from Buffalo. I took a defensive end named Peter Dybo, who was from one of the city schools. And I took another kid named Charlie Forness, who went to Riverside. He never finished at Marshall, but the other three did finish. And I think most of them still live down there. So anyway, after that, I recruited a number of kids from Western New York. I recruited probably one of the greatest running backs to ever come out of Western New York. He was at Sweet Home High School. His name was Bob Tracy. He was fantastic. How I got him, I don't know. We didn't cheat. We didn't pay him. It was Maryland or us. And I knew Joe Shiflett, and he helped me recruit him, but he was a terrific player. I recruited 4 or 5 kids from Kenmore East, 2 kids with similar names. One kid's name was Burgoyne. The other kid's name was Burgoon. I recruited a linebacker named Mike Clark. I recruited a running back named Stevenson. I recruited a big, tall tight end from Angola named Joe Messai, who I believe is related to the boxer. And he ended up going back to some school in Maine and playing basketball. But I recruited a whole bunch of kids from Western New York.
After Marshall, you end up going to even a bigger city and a bigger market when you went to Boston College.
I did.
What was that experience like? And was there culture shock involved with that as well at that point?
Well, at that time, Boston College was one of the leading schools in the country with big-time offensive linemen. We never got the super great skilled athletes like they might get at Penn State or Pitt or whatever, but we would play those teams and occasionally beat them. So I went from a mid-American type level of football to a major college level of football. And I had 5 or 6 guys that played in the National Football League. I had a center that played probably 12 years with the Chargers named Donnie Masick. I had 5 or 6 other kids that played in the NFL. And we had the backup quarterback to Terry Bradshaw. His name was Mike Kruzek, was our quarterback. And my second year there, we beat Texas when they had Earl Campbell and Darrell Royal. So I was getting into the big time, as far as, big linemen, 6'5", 270, 80 pounds, which was big at that time. So it was a move up, no question.
Did you refine your coaching style at Boston College, or was it at Wake Forest, your next stop?
No, I never refined anything. All I did was I continued to learn, and going to clinics, going to spring practices of other schools, going to pro camps. I'd keep learning and updating and whatever. I didn't change anything, but applied my new learning skills because I always learned every year. And that's how I grew as a coach. It wasn't that I changed my personality or anything like that. When I went to Wake Forest, now that was unbelievable. I mean, what a beautiful campus. We only had like 2,000 students. We were in the ACC. My second year at Wake Forest, we beat Georgia, we beat Auburn, we beat Virginia Tech, we beat North Carolina. We played Charlie McClendon's LSU team in a bowl game. And it was impressive for a school that size. We had nice facilities, not the facilities they have now, but it was a beautiful school, beautiful little community, Winston-Salem, North Carolina. You could smell the tobacco all over the city. And I had 3 or 4 kids that played in the NFL from Wake Forest also.
In 1980, you get a phone call. Your wife takes a phone call. It's from the Cincinnati Bengals and Forrest Gregg. And what was going through your mind when you got that message to give Forrest Gregg a call back, and the NFL is calling looking for you?
Well, I was in Boston recruiting, and my wife says Forrest Gregg called, and I said, Forrest Gregg wouldn't be calling me. I mean, you know, it's got to be a joke. Somebody's got to be playing a joke on me. At that time, Forrest Gregg, he was the coach of the Cleveland Browns, and he got fired by Art Modell. Then he went to the Toronto Argonauts, and I believe his team won the Grey Cup. So Paul Brown fired the coach that was at the Bengals, Homer Rice, and I think it was Homer Rice, and he hired Forrest Gregg. And Paul Brown, who was also fired by Art Modell, he told Forrest Gregg that we're going to get together and kick the hell out of the Cleveland Browns. So anyway, I get to a phone the same day or whatever, and he either called me back or I called him, and he said, hello. And he had a southern, well, he's from Texas, but he had one of those southern drawls. Yeah, this is Forrest Gregg. This is Jimmy McNally. Yes, sir, it is. Are you shitting me? Are you really Forrest Gregg? Is this a joke? And no, he said it was him. And he said that one of his assistants at the Argonauts, who was a scout previously for some NFL teams, saw me coach at Wake Forest and thought I'd be a good candidate to be the offensive line coach at the Cincinnati Bengals, because their offensive line coach, a guy named Mike McCormick, was up for the head coaching job of the Baltimore Colts. And Forrest Gregg was going to keep on Mike McCormick as his line coach. Well, Mike McCormick got the head coaching job of the Baltimore Colts. And therefore, there was a job open at the Bengals. So they brought me in, and Forrest Gregg at that time, you know, this was in the early, well, my God, this was 1979 and 1980. Forrest, who was a big guy, now he was about 6'4", 265, which was a big guy at that time. And he was an all-pro. In fact, there was a plaque on his wall when I went in his office that said, Forrest Gregg is the greatest football player I've ever coached, signed Vince Lombardi. So, man, I knew I was in great company, obviously. And we went into a back room, and I had Forrest Gregg in a 3-point stance, sweating as I'm telling him how to move and how I would coach him and this, that, and the other. And I knew down deep, I said, I got this Forrest Gregg, this Hall of Fame player, doing what I want him to do as if I was his coach. I said, I know I'm going to get this job. And a week later, he called me, and, you know, he said he had to interview a few other people, and he did a little research on me, and he hired me. And that was in 1980.
What was the transition like to going from college to the pro game?
Well, see, the Bengals, when I went there, they had only won 4 games previous. And I had just come from a team that beat Auburn and Georgia and whatever. So, I mean, obviously they were better players because you had more better players being professional athletes, but their record was not good. And the exposure to the community was, the Bengals aren't very good, and, you know, this, that, and the other. So it wasn't like I went from from Wake Forest to the Kansas City Chiefs, who just won the Super Bowl. So being a part of building a program took a little more effort than saying, "Oh man, I'm in the big time now." No, we worked our butt off to get the best players or recruit the best players. So I didn't have that awe of moving to the NFL. I got a raise, of course, and the players were good, but just trying to build a better program because of the pressure you got in the NFL kind of overrode that now I'm in the big time. Of course, I knew I was in the big time when we drafted Anthony Munoz with the first pick. So my first year as a coach and his first year as a player, we were together. And 13 years later, we were still together.
He was the exception to the rule. You didn't have a lot of high draft choices that you worked with, or were free agents, that you worked with. For some reason, the Bengals did not expend that type of draft resources on early picks for linemen. What was your philosophy on trying to, I'm not going to say manipulate, but to get players to number one, buy in, and number two, become good players or better players?
Well, the head coach, Forrest Gregg, was so tough on him. And I mean, he was tough. We did these up downs like Lombardi did. And they wouldn't have cared if I didn't know a thing about football. They were so thankful to come to me in my meeting room after Forrest Gregg got done chewing their ass out that they would not have cared. And of course, I was a student of the game. And, I think I probably was a lot more updated than the players might have thought. I mean, I think I surprised them because I was a football junkie. So I had no problem at all with anyone saying, "Oh, you don't know what you're doing," or whatever. I mean, we were all together. We were trying to build a better team. So I didn't really go through that, "Oh man, here's a young college coach. He doesn't know what he's doing," because most of the players we had either weren't quite good enough or, the reputation of the team wasn't that good. So, I mean, I fit into a perfect organization to build my, to improve my skills with guys that wanted coaching and respected me for working hard to get them better. So there was no, I was lucky enough. I had no, "Oh, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. This guy's just a young coach." No, I mean, it almost went the other way. It's like, "Oh man, this young guy, he's the greatest." So it almost went the other way.
At Cincinnati, you were with three different head coaches, which is in a lot of ways doesn't happen today. Usually...
No, I would probably still be there. No, I really wouldn't, because eventually I'd have retired. But I quit. I mean, I left on my own accord. I was there 15 years. I could have been there 30. The owner loved me. I mean, he told any new coach, "You keep McNally." And after Forrest Gregg went to the Packers, and we had Sam Weish, we went to 2 Super Bowls. And then in the early 90s, we really didn't get involved with Plan B, free agency. We were losing the reporters, the newspapers. The Bengals suck. The Bengals aren't any good. Mike Brown, the owner, he's cheap, and my job was football. And this kind of depressed me. So Bill Polian, who was the GM for the Bills, became the GM of the Panthers. And we had played the Bills a number of times when I was at the Bengals, and he liked me. And so Polian actually hired me at the Panthers before the head coach of the Panthers hired me. So I left the Bengals on my own accord because we were regressing as far as staying up with all the other teams that were getting into free agency, etc. So that's why I left. So, and I went to the Panthers.
I want to backtrack just a little bit. How was it working for Mike and Paul Brown all those years?
They were great with me. I mean, I was with Paul Brown for a good 10 out of my 15 years. I'd walk right down the hall. He'd take me to lunch all the time. He did everything at the same time, at the same day, at 10 minutes to 12. He'd get in the car. We'd go to the same place. I wouldn't go with him every day, but he'd go to the same place. He'd dinner at the same time. He knew how to give you he never yelled or screamed, but when we would have our meetings and he would be in there watching film with us, he kind of lost track of all the X's and O's because he was the owner, and but he knew when something went wrong, and he'd give you a little needle, and I mean he knew how to touch the right buttons, and he was great. I mean, he was just being in the presence of him was as big a part of my NFL career as any that I had, actually. And then Mike was good to me, the son. And but they were a family business. I mean, they were in the football business. They weren't the car dealership, and they didn't own real estate Mongols, etc. So they were fairly protective with their finances and monies and so forth. And that changed, though, as the years went on and I left. They became more in tune with all the other teams in the league, and they got the full complement of coaches now, the full complement of scouts. They'll pay big money. So they transitioned into being a kind of a small business or they wouldn't stay alive if they didn't keep up with everyone else.
You had success with the Panthers, then you had success with the Giants. What were those experiences like?
Well, the second year with the Panthers, it was unbelievable. I mean, the Panthers, it was a totally different environment. The coaches coached, the scouts scouted. At the Bengals, when I was at the Bengals, the coaches did almost all the scouting. I could move players up and down on the board, put this guy ahead of, no, I want this guy. I'd tell Mike, no, let's take this guy, blah, blah, blah. At the Panthers, it wasn't the same. The way Bill Polian ran it, the scouts, you might have looked at video of players and gave your opinion, but the scouting department picked the players, you coached the players. That was a change for me. But the facilities were unbelievable. And we had a brand new stadium in Erickson Stadium, and our facilities were top of the line, once we got them built. And the owner, Jerry Richardson, he impressed on everybody that you're always polite to everybody. You don't put anybody down. And the bottom line is our second year, and we got a lot of semi-cast off from the Bills. Polian brought them in. Frank Reich, Don Beebe, a number of players, Carlton Bailey, and they were still had some good play in them. Our second year, we went to the championship game against Green Bay, and if we'd have won the game, we'd have gone to Super Bowl. This is a second year of an expansion team, and we were only there 4 years because our last 2 years weren't very good, and the owner fired the coach. So I needed a job, and that's when I went to the Giants.
How was it working with the Giants at that point and the Mara family? A lot like the Browns at that point.
I go from one icon, Paul Brown, to another, Wellington Mara, who was just a tremendous guy, tremendous person. And then they had great history with Lawrence Taylor and Phil Simms and that group of guys. I wasn't with that group, but the head coach was Jim Fossil. But we had some good players, And the exposure to New York City was new to me. I mean, I've been to New York City before, but living 15 miles from Giant Stadium and no more than 20 miles from downtown Manhattan, and going into the city, seeing plays, being in that big metropolis was an eye-opener. I mean, you know, there was nothing that you couldn't go to or see or restaurant or play or whatever. And we had some terrific football players, Tiki Barber, Michael Strahan. We had, I mean, just a number of outstanding football players. Second year, we beat the Minnesota Vikings in the championship game, 41-0, and went to the Super Bowl. And the problem was we played probably the best defensive team ever in football. That was the Baltimore Colts team of 2000. And I will assure you they were just as good, if not better, than the Bears defense of 1985. They had Tony Saragusa, Sam Adams, Ray Lewis, a guy named McAllister. I mean, we could have gone the same day of the game. We didn't need to go a week beforehand in practice. We could have gone the same day of the game and got the hell kicked out of us because they were just unbelievable. We couldn't find any plays to prepare for a goal line offense in 16-game season and counting preseason. We couldn't find, we might have found one play in the preseason that was maybe inside the 5-yard line going into score when we were preparing for a goal line offense.
Makes it kind of difficult to score and plan for
we didn't
something
get
like
close.
that.
I think we ran a kickoff back, but and they won the game with kind of a no-name quarterback. I think he was a pretty good quarterback teacher, you know, in his later years, but he wasn't a great quarterback. And most teams have great quarterbacks, but they had a great defense. Yeah, they were fantastic, actually.
And then you came back and were able to coach with the hometown Buffalo Bills.
Yes, I came back to the Bills because Tom Donahue was at the Steelers for all the years I was at the Bengals. And I can't remember one in my 15 years, I can't remember too many times that the Steelers beat us. Even the years they went to the Super Bowl, we had a hex on them. And Tom Donahue knew who I was from the Bengals. And he actually, and Mike Mularkey was the coach of the Bills, the new coach. And Mularkey approved me. Donahue, you know, hired me basically through Mularkey. But the problem was we didn't have a quarterback. And the best we had was 2004. We had Bledsoe, and we won 9 games. And we were going to go to the playoffs, but we played Pittsburgh in our last game, and they didn't play all their players because they were already going to be in the playoffs. And we lost the game, and we didn't make the playoffs. So that was a real downer. And then they got rid of Bledsoe, and then we never had a quarterback. I mean, and then they never had a quarterback until they got the guy they got now. And but I had some good kids. I had some good linemen. You know, I had Jason Peters. I had him, you know, we moved him from a tight end to a tackle. And, you know, he didn't know anything about playing tackle, but, you know, 17 years later, I think he's still playing, and he's going to make the Hall of Fame. But so then in about 2007, I reached retirement age, and I said, well, I know they're going to fire somebody, okay, soon. So I'd rather live in my own hometown, retiring before getting fired, because I'm kind of a semi-hero here. And I was at retirement age where I could get my pension. So I retired in about 2008. And then immediately, Shawn Payton at the Saints hired me as a consultant. You know, I'd go to training camp, and I'd do a lot of projects on the internet with them. I did that for 2 years. Then a guy named Bill Callahan, a close friend of mine, was with the Jets, and Rex Ryan was the head coach there, and I had played for his dad. So they brought me to the Jets for 2 years as a consultant. I go back and forth. I'd go to a couple games. I'd go to training camp. I didn't have to be there all the time. And then Callahan left to go to the Cowboys. And then the Bengals line coach brought me back, Paul Alexander, and Mike Brown okayed it. He said, "You're the first guy we ever brought back." And I must have spent, right up until this year, a good 10 years being a consultant with the Bengals and doing a lot of projects that are kind of complicated. But I would do a lot of charting of defensive player moves and having the video department put them out there for the players. And I'd go to training camp. And this is the first year I'm not doing any of that because, to be honest with you, the owner was almost in tears. He said, "Jimmy, you're the best coach we've ever had." He said, "But I got 23 coaches and 4 or 5 of them are making well over $2 million. Somebody can do your job." So, I think my pay was $45,000. So, and I'm almost 80 years old. So, his daughter and son-in-law, I think, got in his ear. And I really wasn't fired. I mean, it was time to, I still do a lot on Twitter. Players come and visit me. Coaches come and visit me. They pay me. I sell videotapes, but not enough to make a living. But, I have a good retirement. So now I'm just kind of a freelancer and work with, I have my own little camps and clinics and et cetera.
How have offensive linemen changed in the last 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? And or maybe how the players have changed in that time period as well?
Well, they're bigger. And the requirements to get bigger people are there. No longer the 6'2", 265-pound player is even considered. The height is a big deal, more for the guards and tackles. I mean, there's a few guards that are 6'2", but the tackle's got to be 6'6", 6'5" minimum. Long arms to push the guy around the corner. And they've got so many new equipment, weightlifting equipment, coaches that coach them in their running form and get them faster and get them stronger and, nutrition. And they got everything. They got everything now. And I think the players now are better. There's no question. They're better than the ones 20 years ago. Anthony Munoz could still play today. And I have a few other players who could still play today. But they're bigger. They're stronger. They're faster. But they do not really relate with their own hometown team. In the old days of the Lou Picones and the Charlie Fergusons and the Booker Edersons, you kind of had to get another job. And you made Buffalo your home. Now, these players can't wait to either get their next contract with another team or till the season's over so they can go back home at some southern city that they've made their home because they all like the warm weather. And so the local fans are more appreciative and are more gung-ho for the players than it is vice versa.
Speaking of which, you could have lived anywhere in the United States. Why have you still remained, or why did you come back to Orchard Park?
Well, I came back here because I was born and raised here. I went to Kenmore High School, Kenmore West. I went to UB. I coached at UB. I got all my friends that are still living here. I got all my doctors here, and this is my home. And I finished here. So it was a natural. I would move back to, I probably should move back to Cincinnati because I got 2 daughters there with 2 grandkids, but they're my oldest daughter, 2 daughters are in college. But my younger daughters got 2 younger kids. And I really should go back to Cincinnati because my 2 daughters are there. But I got all my doctors here. I got my college here. I got my high school here. And I got my closest friends here.
What piece of advice would you give to today's athletes?
The best advice I could give, and they pretty well do it, but I would say spend as much time working hard and playing hard for the team you're on, your own high school team, your own college team, as you are worrying about where you're going next or who's going to see your highlight film or your huddle film or what school you're going to portal to next in college. Now they all, they play hard, but it's different than, let's say, the kid that's 5'10", 165 pounds, starting center for Tonawanda High School, and his last game of his senior year, he's done. He might go to Ohio State and study medicine, but he's done with football and he's going to miss football for the rest of his life. But the better players are going to go on. And so what I'm saying to you, you got to think, you got to play football for your school and for those other kids that aren't going to be able to play again. And they're looking ahead. And it's like anybody else that's looking to get a better job. It's just the nature of the world.
Do you like the idea of one sport only for an athlete, or a multi-sport athlete?
Multi-sport, no question. Multi-sport, no question. And if they got to play them both at the same time, you got to play them both at the same time. And yes, I totally agree with that. And for a coach to say, no, you're not going to play basketball if you play football. Now, there is a chance of injury, obviously, in the one sport, but you take that, in consideration. So, yes, I believe you play what you're good at, not what you're best at. I mean, if you're a good baseball, basketball, football, you play them all. If your grades are good enough. But in college, there's very few because they are on a scholarship and they can't lose that scholarship. But I do know there are a number of college players that have played football and basketball or played the opposite sport. We had a kid, he's in his 8th year now. He's with Denver. His name is Chris Manhertz. He was a power forward at Canisius, never played high school football. He's now in his 9th year and one of the highest paid tight ends in football. Plays for the Denver Broncos. Chris Manhertz.
We've heard of him. He's made quite the career for himself. When the Mouse Pack gets together, do the stories get better and better, richer and juicier every year?
With me, my closest friends are the ones I grew up with. And the ones I played with or coached with are somewhere else. So I was, on and off 25 years with the Bengals, but I don't live in Cincinnati. So I don't see those people. So I think it's pretty much the stories get bigger and better to wherever you live. Okay? So let's say a kid went to Wake Forest. Well, there's not too many people that are going to live in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. So the number of times that they're going to see their college buddies who are spread all over the world, maybe 5 times before they die at 5 reunions. So you just don't have that companion. Now, the high school kids that live in Tonawanda or North Tonawanda and get together every year, yeah, those stories get bigger and better because they're there. They live there. You know, they hang out there. Okay. But like I say, I think distance is a factor now of everyone getting together to share those stories.
Do you ever look back and pinch yourself and said, my God, what have I done and what a great career I carved out? A kid from Kenmore?
I never have done that. I may have thought a little bit like that while I was coaching, okay? But the problem was, it was like anything else. Sooner or later, you're going to get fired. Sooner or later, the head coach is going to get fired. Now, I left on my accord with the Bengals, okay? And I left on my accord with the Bills. But my point was that you're always on edge a little bit because they pay you big money now in college and now obviously in the NFL. And you're always got that little thing behind that you're going to be looking for a job. It's not for everyone. Yeah, it's not for the local high school coach that says, geez, I'd like to get in the NFL someday. His chances are probably 0 to 1%.
One final question.
Yeah.
How would Jim McNally like to be remembered?
Well, I would probably like to be remembered that, it's kind of a generic thing that I always worked hard. I never took a shortcut. Very rarely did I ever take a shortcut on anything. And that I was always trying to get my players better. And that generally, I didn't throw the players under the bus. Now, that doesn't mean I was soft on them, but I would try my damnedest. Now, occasionally I might say something in the newspaper that I should not have said, but I was probably pretty much, because the players will tell you this too, they won't remember the games or the Super Bowls or the rings they've got. They will remember the camaraderie or the personal relationships with the players or the coach.
Same holds true for high school as well and college, correct?
Absolutely. I don't hold, I've coached some college players that never went into the pros, or I played with some high school kids that were football players. A football player is a football player. And, the guy might have been 175 pounds. A high school player, he never played anymore, never went to college, played football, but he was a tough guy. I don't treat him any different than I treat Anthony Munoz, the greatest player to ever play his position.
Coach Jim McNally,
I think he was just as good a football player.
Coach Jim McNally, this has been a lot of fun. Time has flown by during this conversation. I wish we could do this. We could stay here for 4, 5, 6 hours. I'm sure you've got plenty of stories, but this has been a lot of fun. I want to thank you so much for joining me here today, and thanks for sharing your trip down memory lane.
Well, I enjoyed it very much, and it keeps me remembering. I'll never forget until I go, totally crazy. But I mean, it always reminds me to remember when I get to talk about my past.
Coach, thank you so much. Be well.
Thank you, Ed. Appreciate it. Had a good time.